Good morning, everyone, / good afternoon, / good evening. We've all met someone who walks into a room and seems to light it up. They're magnetic, words smooth as silk, eye contact on point, gestures that make you feel like you're the only person in the world. That charm, it's intoxicating. It makes you lean in, it makes you trust quickly and without guardrails. But here's the truth we don't talk about enough. Not every charming person has your best interest at heart. Sometimes that smile, that shine, is a mask. Toxic people don't always show up in villainous capes. More often than not, they arrive wrapped in likability. They laugh easily, say all the right things, and read the emotional room like a script they've rehearsed. They don't demand power, they earn it by making you feel seen, heard, even special. But underneath, there's a different motive. Charm becomes a tool, not of connection, but of control. This type of charm isn't accidental, it's strategic. It's often weaponized to lower your defenses. You may find yourself sharing secrets too soon, making compromises you wouldn't usually make, giving second chances when your gut is screaming for boundaries. You tell yourself, she didn't mean it that way, or she's just having a rough time. You begin rewriting your own intuition to keep the peace or keep the connection. And let's be honest, it's hard to see it when you're in it because the disarming smile is also paired with public praise, warmth in front of others, and those breadcrumb moments of vulnerability that make you think she's just misunderstood. But behind closed doors, the warmth cools. You start to question your memory. Your emotions are labeled as too much. She makes subtle jabs that sound like jokes, and when you react, you're suddenly the one being dramatic. What's most painful is how invisible the harm can be. People on the outside don't see it. They see the charm, the philanthropy, the birthday cards, the helpful advice. So when you start to speak up, even tentatively, you're often met with disbelief. She would never do that. And just like that, the mask works double time, protecting her and isolating you. We often associate abuse or manipulation with overt hostility. But in reality, one of the most insidious forms of emotional harm is delivered in a package so pleasing, so elegant, that you almost feel guilty for not appreciating it. That's the twist. You end up feeling like the bad guy for finally setting boundaries or walking away because you weren't just dealing with someone toxic, you were dealing with someone beloved. So, what do we do with this? First, we remember that charm is not character. Being likable is not the same as being kind. Consistency, accountability, and emotional safety, those are the real signs of integrity. Second, we stop silencing our intuition in the name of harmony. If something feels off, it probably is. And finally, we remind ourselves that protecting our peace doesn't make us harsh, it makes us whole. You don't owe anyone your blind trust just because they know how to perform goodness. You are allowed to look behind the mask even if everyone else is still applauding the show. We tend to think of manipulation as something obvious, deceptive, sneaky, aggressive. But the truth is, some of the most harmful manipulation doesn't sound like a lie or a threat. It sounds like love. It sounds like I'm just looking out for you. It looks like care. It wears the mask of protection, of wisdom, of experience. And that's exactly what makes it so dangerous because we don't see the control until we're already under it. There's a particular kind of woman who wraps her manipulation in layers of faux concern. She doesn't scream, she advises. She doesn't demand, she suggests what's best. but every word is loaded. Every just checking in is a reconnaissance mission. Every "you deserve better" is quietly eroding your trust in someone else. Every "I wouldn't do that if I were you" isn't support, it's a leash. And you feel it. You start questioning yourself, wondering if maybe she is right because she cares so much, doesn't she? This kind of manipulation is so effective because it doesn't feel like abuse. It feels like guidance. You find yourself adjusting your choices, not because you want to, but because you want to keep her approval. And if you step outside her expectations, suddenly her concern turns into disappointment, coldness, distance. And now you're the one feeling guilty for making your own decisions. That's not love. That's emotional control disguised as care. What's wild is how subtle it all is. You might hear things like, "I just want what's best for you," or "I don't think he's good enough for you," or "I'm only saying this because I love you." But it's never said with a spirit of true respect. It's not offered with open hands. It's delivered with invisible strings. Strings that pull you toward who she thinks you should be instead of honoring who you already are. The hard part, sometimes we want that guidance. We're tired, we're vulnerable. We just want someone to say, "Here's what to do." And when she steps in with that voice of certainty, that maternal tone of concern, we give her that power, not because we're weak, but because we're human. And she knows that. The manipulation works because it meets a real need, but twists it to serve her agenda, not yours. And here's where the shame kicks in. When you finally start noticing the control, it's easy to gaslight yourself. You think, "She's not that bad," or "maybe I'm being ungrateful," because she's never cruel, she's never obvious, she's concerned, loving, there for you. And you end up stuck between two truths. She's helped you in some ways, but she's also chipped away at your confidence, your independence, your voice. So what do you do with that? You get honest. You stop judging yourself for needing support. And you start asking better questions. Does this person celebrate my autonomy? Do I feel free after we talk? Or do I feel small? Does their care make me stronger or more dependent? These questions are hard, but they're clarifying. And clarity is what manipulation fears most. You are allowed to trust yourself, even when someone else sounds wiser. You're allowed to walk away from care that comes with conditions. Real love, real concern doesn't control, it supports. It doesn't pull you closer only when you obey. It stands beside you even when you disagree. That's not just healthy, that's sacred. And anything less, you don't owe it space in your life. Some wounds don't come from cruelty or conflict. Some come from being quietly measured all the time. Being in the presence of someone who's always comparing, always competing, doesn't look like warfare. It looks like subtle one-upmanship. It feels like shrinking. And over time, it's not just tiring, it's emotionally eroding. You start to question your own worth, not because of what's said directly, but because of what's constantly implied. You're not quite enough. There's a kind of woman who never attacks you outright. Instead, she turns every shared moment into a silent scoreboard. You tell her something good that happened, she tells you something better. You express pride in your progress, she reminds you of her achievements. You're vulnerable about a struggle, she's been through worse. You're never just allowed to exist. You're always being sized up. And that kind of emotional measuring tape, it's exhausting. This isn't just about competition. It's about the slow, steady message that being yourself is not quite sufficient, not quite impressive enough, not quite hardworking enough, not quite smart, stylish, or self-aware. And when that message is wrapped in a smile, a compliment, or a casual story about her own accidental success, it becomes hard to call out. You end up smiling along, pretending it doesn't sting, while deep down a little voice whispers, "You're falling behind." What makes this dynamic so harmful is that it often happens in relationships where support should live. Friends, sisters, coworkers, people who claim to love you and maybe even do in their own distorted way. But love without safety is not love. And when someone sees your growth not as something to celebrate, but as a threat to their own sense of self, competition becomes their language. You don't get a cheerleader. You get a rival with a soft voice and sharp edges. And here's where it gets even trickier. Sometimes you start to compete back. Not because you want to, but because you feel like you have to earn your place in the relationship. You start dressing for her approval. You tell stories with a slight edge of exaggeration. You hide your hard days, or worse, downplay your wins, because if you shine too bright, it becomes awkward. If you struggle too openly, you're pitied or dismissed. So you live in this weird emotional limbo, never too much, never too little, always editing yourself to stay in balance with her ego. That's not friendship. That's survival. And surviving inside a comparison-based relationship slowly empties you. You start believing the lie that there's only one spotlight, and if she's standing in it, there's none left for you. But here's the truth. Real connection isn't a competition. There is more than enough room, enough love, enough attention, enough light, but only if you're surrounded by people who aren't afraid of you having some of it too. So what do you do when you notice the chronic comparison? You name it, even if only to yourself at first. You start noticing how you feel after each interaction. Drained, insecure, compelled to prove something. That's not a you problem. That's a sign of emotional imbalance. And then gently but firmly, you give yourself permission to stop auditioning. You reclaim your worth, not in reaction to her, but as something that was never up for debate in the first place. You are not someone else's mirror. You're not here to reflect back their insecurities or validate their importance. You are a whole, growing, glowing person in your own right, and anyone who needs to outshine you in order to feel bright is not your people. Gaslighting rarely begins as something loud. It starts in whispers. A tilted head, a soft correction. That's not how it happened. You're reading too much into it. You're being sensitive. It's almost gentle at first, just subtle enough to make you question your own recall, your own gut, your own sense of the moment. You chalk it up to miscommunication, maybe even laugh it off. But underneath, something shifts. A seed of doubt is planted. What makes gaslighting so cruel is not just the distortion, it's the erosion. It doesn't usually show up as one big lie, but 1,000 little ones. A slow, steady unraveling of your confidence. You remember being hurt by something she said, but somehow she's made you the one who overreacted. You try to bring something up and she spins it so well you end up apologizing. It's not just that your reality's dismissed, it's that it's replaced. Bit by bit, you stop trusting your feelings. And once that happens, she doesn't even have to lie anymore. You'll do the doubting for her. Gaslighting is a master class in psychological control. The toxic woman who uses it doesn't need to be outwardly cruel. She just has to be consistently invalidating. When you're confident, she brings up a mistake from the past. When you're excited, she reminds you of how things could go wrong. She plays the victim when she's caught and the hero when you stumble. You're constantly being emotionally redirected, so the focus is never on her behavior, only on your reaction. And over time, that distortion affects more than your memory. It touches your identity. You become smaller, quieter. You start second guessing things you once knew with certainty. You stop speaking up because it always leads to confusion. You feel anxious around her, but you can't explain why, because she's never technically done anything unforgivable. And so the cycle continues. You begin living in the space between what happened and what you're allowed to admit happened. It's important to understand that gaslighting isn't just manipulation, it's emotional disorientation. It makes you feel like you're lost in your own life, like you're standing in a house someone keeps rearranging every time you leave the room. But here's the hardest part. Even when you start to see it, it's terrifying to name it. Because once you admit that someone close to you has been rewriting your reality, you can't unknow that truth. And that truth will ask you to act. And that's where your power begins to come back. The first step out of gaslighting isn't confrontation, it's clarity. It's writing things down, naming what you felt, reclaiming what actually happened, even if no one else validates it. Because your truth matters, your experience is real, and anyone who tries to erase that is not protecting you, they're preserving their own control. You are not crazy. You are not unstable. You are not overreacting. You are waking up, and that is the beginning of healing. It's tempting to think of someone who hurts us as simply evil. It gives us emotional closure, a sense of distance. It makes it easier to label, easier to walk away, and in some cases, that clarity is needed for survival. But if we really want to understand how manipulation, cruelty, or emotional harm gets into our lives, especially from women who were supposed to be safe, we have to look deeper. Because behind most emotional weapons is a wound, a pain that was never processed, a story that was never healed. The toxic behavior you experience, the criticism, the control, the jealousy, the gaslighting, didn't come out of nowhere. It came from somewhere deep inside her. Maybe it was abandonment. Maybe it was generational trauma. Maybe she learned early on that power was the only way to feel safe, that if she didn't control everything, she'd be crushed. And so instead of becoming soft and whole, she became sharp. Her survival story became a weapon. And unfortunately, you were close enough to be cut by it. That doesn't mean you're supposed to excuse her. It doesn't mean you're called to fix her. It means you can stop internalizing her behavior as your fault. Because here's the trick with projection. It makes you feel like you're the problem, but really you were just a canvas for her own fears. Your confidence triggered her insecurity. Your joy reminded her of her emptiness. Your boundaries woke up her control issues. And instead of facing those things, she made you carry them. Understanding the wound behind the weapon doesn't mean staying in harm's way. It means releasing the part of you that keeps asking, what did I do wrong? You stop dancing for her approval. You stop playing small to avoid her judgment. And you start to grieve not just the pain she caused you, but the relationship you hoped she could be. That grief is real, and it deserves space. Some of the hardest healing comes not from walking away, but from staying gone after you've understood why they hurt you. Because the compassionate part of you might want to go back now that you see her pain, but knowing someone's story doesn't make them safe. And loving someone's potential doesn't make them healthy. You can honor her humanity from afar. You can pray for her healing without inviting her back into your life. The wound behind the weapon explains the pain, but it doesn't justify the damage. You are allowed to move forward with compassion and also with boundaries. You are allowed to say, I see your pain, but I will not be your target. That's not cold. That's clarity. And clarity is what protects you as you step into the next version of your life, one where your peace is no longer negotiable.